The amount he lost in waiting could be his salary for 140 years of work. He immediately grabs his phone to check his assets. Lucas is seized with excitement and ponders whether to sell his bitcoins urgently. No need to be greedy anymore. He already has more than 30 billion won. However, at this moment, Lucas is approached by colleagues eager to find out what he is doing. Lucas flinches at the surprise, not expecting to be interrupted. Lucas's colleague chuckles when he sees that he is studying the Bitcoin rate. He asks if the man wants to invest in Bitcoins, and Lucas sweats nervously as he comes up with an answer. Colleagues are sure that since Lucas does not look well, then there are some problems with investing. He does not name the real amount, but his colleagues still support him and wish him good luck. Lucas sighs heavily, thinking about whether the price of Bitcoin will really go up again. He asks his colleagues if they have seen the recent price collapse. The men look at each other, grinning, and shake their heads. Lucas tries to find out what is the reason for these smiles, and one of his colleagues says that he does not follow the news. It shows the current Bitcoin rate, and Lucas is completely speechless. The price jumped up again, and quite strongly. He even begins to cry from relief, and his colleagues courageously support Lucas. They convince us that the real takeoff is just beginning. It turns out that one of them bought Bitcoins and has already earned more than 1,000,001. However, Lucas is still terribly afraid of another fall. Men's confidence, however, gives him hope that perhaps he can still wait. And literally the next day, there is a sharp jump in the price of Bitcoin. This is shaking the world community, and everyone is talking about cryptocurrency. Bitcoin is becoming a store of value that surpasses gold. And on the next day, the cost of Bitcoin reaches an exorbitant figure. As a result, Lucas's current assets exceed 100 billion or won. When a man sees the total amount, he becomes hysterical. His heart is beating wildly. He is sweating. He cannot breathe normally. Therefore, all Lucas can do is try to breathe calmly and kratom. The man forces himself to calm down, reminds himself that this is not his money until he sells his assets. Now it was really time for him to make a decision. He could not postpone any longer. Therefore, Lucas is tormented by whether he should sell everything or wait further. Not used to such amounts, he is afraid of making the wrong move. Greed overwhelms him in the blink of an eye, convincing him that he can earn more. Dark thoughts overwhelm Lucas. He wants to earn tens of billions just sitting still. Therefore, submitting to these thoughts, he first decides to wait a little longer. But then the voice of his father, who once convinced him that everything would work out, appears in his memory. Lucas looks at a framed picture of his father on the closet. Once upon a time, my father believed that buying a new currency was his chance to become a good person and parent. When his father spent his time gambling, he always promised to buy Lucas new clothes and a bag if he won big. He'd been putting his life off all this time, and Lucas knew it was time to make a change. The next day, Sue is actively working in the office, typing important documents. She stretches with pleasure to stretch herself from sitting still for a long time. Sue points out that Lucas never showed up in the office after they returned. The girl approaches one of the managers and presents the results of her work, and he thanks her for her work. The manager tells the girl that Lucas took a day off because he is not in the office. Sue hopes that nothing serious happened to the man. Meanwhile, Lucas finally leaves the house and goes shopping. The first destination for it is the car interior. The salon employee asks if the client has any wishes. Lucas feels uncomfortable, but one car still catches his attention. It turns out to be a recently released white Ferrari model, created for both city driving and sports. Lucas decides to buy it, but when the salon employee starts talking about the payment options, he interrupts him. He holds out a bank card, offering to make a purchase immediately, since he plans to pay for his new car in a lump sum. The day before, Lucas sold his assets and earned $100 million, or 100 billion won. Now Lucas is young and rich, a very pleased man. However, he does not immediately understand what to do with such a huge amount of money. He decides to buy a car first, and now he will have to wait for it to be delivered from the salon. Having spent a huge amount of money by former standards, Lucas leaves the salon. He is belatedly panicked that he has spent almost $500 million won. Nevertheless, he took the first step on the path of pleasant and important expenses. Once he made this list, having the opportunity only to dream of wealth. And the next item on this list is the purchase of a luxury apartment. At the real estate agency, the employees actively welcome Lucas. Lucas reveals that he needs a spacious apartment in a new building overlooking the Han River. Since this is usually a very expensive property, the agency's employees are very interested in such a client. Therefore, Lucas and the realtor go to see one of the options. This is a very large and newly built complex, life in which will cost the hero 2.5 billion won. The realtor tells the man about the bonuses of the territory, such as walking paths, gardens, and a swimming pool. A great advantage of the residential complex is also the gym. The apartment they will be looking at is on the 11th floor, and the realtor calls Lucas to follow him. As in many Korean apartments, the door opens with a key card. Stepping inside, Lucas feels overwhelmed by the size of the apartment. It is so large that you can arrange morning jogging on it. The realtor tells the shocked client that the apartment is fully furnished with furniture made of the highest quality materials. The girl shows two bathrooms, each larger than the apartment in which Lucas now lives. He jokes that there is no need to be afraid of mosquitoes and noise outside the window, and the realtor replies that this is the advantage of high-rise buildings. For Lucas, this place is so chic that he would be willing to live in less comfortable conditions. He opens the window and is speechless in front of the view of the river. It is so beautiful and impressive that a man admires it out loud. The realtor asks for the client's opinion and offers to show other options, but Lucas is satisfied with this apartment. He turns to the girl accompanying him and says that he is taking this option. A real estate agency prepares a contract for him, which Lucas immediately signs. Lucas is offered to pay an initial fee and a brokerage commission for check-in. However, the man takes out the suitcase he brought with him and replies that he will pay the entire amount at once. He opens the suitcase and clarifies that the amount will be paid in cash. As the girls look on in horror at this amount of cash, Lucas asks them to provide a check for the brokerage fee. Meanwhile, in the office where Lucas works, the manager flirts with his colleague in the pantry. He took her to a restaurant the day before and offers to try a better place. He bribes the girl with a night look, grinning, and the girl succumbs to his flirtation. Suddenly, the flirtation is interrupted by Sue bursting into the pantry, who quickly approaches manager Dan. After waiting for Dan's girlfriend to move away a bit, Sue steps closer. She comes almost close, wanting to talk to a man about something important. The man is stunned by such an offensive and does not understand what questions Sue can have for him. Sue looks at her colleague menacingly and asks if he knows where Dan lives. Dan doesn't understand why a popular girl like Sue needs Lucas' address. The girl replies that she wants to visit him because she is worried about Lucas's long absence from work. Dan involuntarily misses the thought of whether Sue is so worried about all her colleagues. However, he doesn't know where Lucas lives either, but he can call him and ask. As a result, he contacts Lucas in a messenger, and he agrees to give them the address. Looking at such an active reaction, Dan wonders if Sue is interested in his senior colleague. As Dan looks at her, Sue almost hums with joy at the upcoming meeting. After a day's work, Sue and Dan buy Lucas some gifts and go to his house. Sue thinks about what Lucas's house could be like, as she is very curious. She thinks that he has a small apartment, since he lives alone and probably neat, clean. Dan also tries to imagine what Lucas' apartment is like. He thinks it's minimalistically furnished because he still lives where he lived before the wedding. They arrive in the neighborhood where Lucas lives, and he doesn't look the way they expected. Once in the apartment, Dan and Sue recoil in shock and horror. Lucas thanks them for coming and apologizes for having to hide behind feeling unwell at work. The apartment they find themselves in turns out to be dirtier and mustier than Dan and Sue thought. However, Lucas does not worry about what is not tidy in it as he is preparing to move. Dan winces in horror at the fact that the apartment looks more like a warehouse than a house and stinks a lot. Lucas explains that this has nothing to do with the house, just a sewer leaking nearby. Sue's fingers touch the wall, which is abundantly covered with black mold. Tears come to the girl's eyes from the thought that he has been living alone in such an apartment all this time. Dan surreptitiously watches Sue tremble with emotion. Therefore, he decides to help Lucas with the move and help collect the boxes. Sue supports this idea. Lucas clarifies if everything is definitely fine because the characters can get dirty, but for them, it is nothing. The hero is grateful to his colleagues for their concern and help. They go out into the parking lot, and Dan looks at one of the cars in surprise. Of course, his attention is focused on the latest Ferrari model. He doesn't understand what such a luxurious machine is doing in this place. Dan thinks he'd like to take a closer look at her, but he's embarrassed in front of his colleagues. Lucas, noticing his interest, calmly approaches the Ferrari and offers to put the boxes in it. Dan and Sue are speechless from the unexpectedness of this proposal. At first, Dan thinks that Lucas rented this car to move. And when the hero says that this is his car, Dan is covered in sweat from shock. The heroes think that Lucas has inherited. Otherwise, they cannot explain where he got a car for 400 million. However, Dan can only think about how he wants to ride it. Lucas suggests that his assistants look at the apartment they are moving to. Dan and Sue certainly agreed to this. They are very curious to see Lucas's new residence. However, there is only one passenger seat in the car, and someone alone can go with him. Sue is sure that she will have to go separately because she is the youngest. However, when she is already preparing to offer it, Dan says that he will go separately. The girl is surprised by such an offer, but Dan says that he still needs to pick up the car. He walks to the car, promising to follow Lucas and Sue. Nevertheless, he cries because he also wants to take a ride in a Ferrari. And he made this decision in order to let Sue spend time with the one she likes. Lucas addresses Sue, saying that it was the first time they were alone since the trip to Busan. Sue reveals that her parents thought Lucas was the person she planned to marry soon. In response, Lucas teases the girl about whether he should play the role of her husband, which drives Sue into the red. Sue is a little embarrassed, not knowing how to talk about the topic that worries her. Lucas watches her awkward attempts and chuckles without malice. The girl brushes it off, not wanting to spoil the moment with awkward questions, although she is very curious to know more about Lucas's ex-wife. The man thanks her for the sensitivity and care that she and Dan show, without asking difficult questions and showing patience. Blushing, Sue replies that she will definitely ask questions when Lucas is ready. She tries to find out where he is moving, but Lucas wants to keep the intrigue going. At this time, there is a telephone conversation between the director of the company and an unknown woman. She says that she is sorting out old things, and she herself is looking at the photos. One of these photos depicts Maria and Lucas during their wedding. The woman's fingers aggressively squeeze the photo, crumpling it. The girl talking on the phone turns out to be Maria herself, Lucas's ex-wife. 6 months after the divorce, she decides to return to work in the office where Lucas works. Lucas's new car races through the streets, sparkling with its cleanliness and well-groomed. It is led by Dan, who is allowed by Lucas to do so, and he is so happy that he is crying. Lucas asks him to be careful not to kill them both, but Dan is too happy to hear him. He has a question for Lucas and wants to know if he can ask it. To Lucas's surprise, Dan asks him about how the man feels about Sue. Lucas doesn't understand why his colleague is asking such sudden questions, but Dan says he's just curious. Lucas does not see a catch in the question. He is trying to figure out what to say. He reflects on how Sue is kind, capable, and cares about others, and is generally a good girl. Dan tries to find out if this is all, but Lucas doesn't know what else his colleague wants to hear. At work, senior colleagues pounce on him on breaks with questions about the new car. Everyone noticed the Ferrari in the parking lot and decided that Lucas had made a fortune on the investment. Lucas says he increased his capital by reinvesting his earnings and pledging his property. Lucas's colleagues, on the contrary, lost some of their funds on bitcoins. Therefore, they turned to Lucas for advice as a more successful investor. The men are sure that Lucas is well-versed in the issue of investments and makes new plans. However, Lucas does not know what to say to them, invent a legend, or tell the whole truth. Lucas replies that in order to invest successfully, you need to have the heart of a beast. He understands that this issue could confuse his colleagues and still decides on the truth. However, colleagues understand the advice in their own way, deciding that psychology, not technique, is important in this matter. The manager asks if Lucas invests in other types of cryptocurrencies, and the man says that he has invested in 2 more. After buying a house and a car, he reinvested the rest of his assets in cryptocurrency. However, he's afraid to give advice, lest he be held responsible for the outcome. Lucas's choice was such cryptocurrencies as Ripple and Ethereum. They're brand new, so colleagues wondered why they made the choice, and Lucas says he thinks they're reliable. Ripple supports international transactions between banks, while Ethereum supports transactions using blockchain technology. Lucas believes that these cryptocurrencies will be of interest to the media and investors. Lucas has really seriously studied the issue of new cryptocurrencies. Meanwhile, Sue cleans up the women's restroom. When she thinks of Lucas, she hears the other girls talking. They discuss gossip about Lucas and the Ferrari he bought. No one believes that he is that rich. Sue isn't surprised that the rumors have already spread throughout the company. One of the girls assures that Lucas got into loans for the sake of the car, and many also discuss that he gambles and loves to drink. One of the girls is disappointed. She had no idea that Lucas was such an unworthy person. Sue, not wanting to hear Lucas's slander anymore, approaches the girls. They are covered with sweat